Gattaca, the 1997 dystopic genetic engineering biometric eugenics film. Why did it move to the top of the list? Pat S. Pat S. said he hates this movie. He was bashing on Ethan Hawke, so I watched it and we tell you what I think about it right now. All right, I am Pops, and yes, I took a rewatch of Gattaca. I remember seeing this in the theater and kind of being ho hum on it at the time. So I thought, let me do a rewatch on this because Pat S was piling on the other night during training day. That link is in the description, and you can get a copy of this. I put the links there for Gattaca as well. The film critics loved this movie when it came out, widespread praise. They loved all the metaphors and all of the film's premises, genetic engineering, social structure, the caste system, everything that kind of plays out. So let me briefly talk about Gattaca and set this up for you.
Genetics. What can it mean? The ability to perfect the physical and mental characteristics of every unborn child.
Of genetic engineering to choose the gene.
Ethan Hawke plays Vincent Freeman. He's a kid that was born naturally, right? Mom had a natural birth and faces genetic discrimination because he shouldn't live past 30 because of all these different illness and ailments that he is privy to. His sibling, a son that came along later for the parents, was genetically chosen out of four viable embryos from an in vitro consultation. And society is built around all of that. His brother is perfect while Vincent is struggling. He has audacious. He's a dreamer. He wants to be someone. And society's kind of broken up into these two types of individuals and classes. One's called a valid, one's called an invalid. They actually have just horrible metaphors and things that are kind of built into it, but never to the point where I feel like it really kind of embraces you a lot. Genetic determinism is a huge factor here versus human will. Can Vincent just choose to do something completely different and go against this infrastructure that's completely built on social engineering, and society is basically trying to have like a pure genetic code, if you will, or at least trying to alienate out those who have predisposition for certain illnesses. And the film really gets into the weeds with that. So Vincent's going to become Jerome Morrow, played by Jude Law, and he's in a wheelchair. He's had a physical constraint from an accident that had happened. We find out more about that throughout the film. He is the one that brings most of the emotional weight of this film. Why he would do this? He basically loans out his genetic entity. They have massive blood tests. They have all sorts of processes that he has to go on. And the opening sequence kind of gives you a tease that where he has to go through this mass exfoliation and shower and purification process to get off as much slough skin and all the hairs and all that. Meanwhile, Jude Law is collecting all of his. They even come up with like a blood cover for like a thumb so he can pass that test. There's all sorts of things. And I think what's interesting is how much the film does a great job through its incredible art design, production details to create this, especially in the 90s, to create this compelling, sterile world where this oppressive society has kind of put everyone into and everyone accepts this. This was the weird thing about this film is that the class system would divide and stay so divided that this rise of population with having any imperfection wouldn't come together and overtake them. But Ethan Hawke trying to find a way to navigate through all of this and basically become an astronaut. It's kind of a weird simpleton dreamer type of thing at the end of the day that's at the backbone of this. I just go to the stars kind of thing. But he was never allowed to do that. And we have flashbacks that kind of set up the Anton versus Vincent. They played chicken swimming, like who could swim the farthest, who could come back. This kind of goes on where Vincent can never win. And there's one chance where he basically like he just kind of goes all in. And it turns sideways because he ends up saving Anton. That's when he leaves the house. And of course, the film culminates with a repeat of that race later in the film. The film takes a sideways turn because he's now kind of got like a little love interest played by Uma Thurman. He has set now for a possible launch date within a few days, and then suddenly there's a murder there at Gattaca, and the crime scene is investigated thoroughly, and they find an eyelash. So literally to that detail, they find an eyelash from Ethan Hawke's character Vincent, now pretending to be Jerome. They think that's the murderer. And the world is basically just the film is centered around that feeling of just closing in, closing in, closing in. And then come to find out that's not the twist. And what will be the fate of not only Vincent, but also will they find out who the real Jerome is and how does Uma fit into all this is kind of the general premise of the film. And I will admit that this is a very dry film. I think the film is one of these that great film in concept. I think the science and stuff is not real plausible. The idea that you could create such a binary world with so many things, like the idea of having so many people who would be genetically pure is in and of itself a bias, right? So many people have, who would be 90 percentiles across the board with so many things? That percentage would be so radically small. The fact that they could oppress so many people with even just one imperfection, like Uma Thurman's character is allowed to kind of be in the club, but she's kind of hiding the fact that she has some sort of heart anomaly that prevents her from going to space. So she's the closest snapshot that we have into knowing where like the gradient is of sort of genetic imperfection and how it's tolerated or not. I think the film allows for, some pretty good stuff for Jude Law's character. He's got the most emotional range and stuff. He works in the wheelchair. He's really one of the most dynamics. Ethan Hawke is almost too old to be the young guy trying to pull this off. And also with enough gravitas for us to have the scenes where he's supposed to feel it. Don't feel like that ever gets pulled off. And I think Uma Thurman's character is completely wasted. She has very little emotional depth. There's very little that we care about, whatever her thing is. She's basically just a plot device for him to have a love interest and create for a few mechanisms to kind of unpack from the second act into the third act. So overall, I think the film works for philosophical questions. It can resonate because it does feel like it's like a timeless topic. This is done in the 90s. So even today, with the eve of AI and genetic testing, obviously genome decoding, things like that, it would not be uncommon. And I think we have seen this within the pro-life debate is people who would select certain babies over others. If they found out there was a certain type of genetic predisposition, they might choose not to have that baby. This sort of genetic determinism would be a world that is kind of like a slippery slope. And I think this actually came out with legislature coming up with like a genetic code act of discrimination or something like that kind of protects that. But the film is so slow paced, though. I don't think it kind of works for me. I don't like the retro futurism where it's supposed to be futuristic with all this tech and stuff they're able to do, yet they drive these retro looking cars and we're supposed to know that they're electric. I had looked that up. I was like, is that really supposed to be in the film? It's like, I don't think it ever gets said, or we're supposed to kind of know that. But I was like, why are the cars? So I think that's where the film noir stuff just does not fit this movie at all. I just thought we have two completely different competing things that don't add up. I think Dark City does this well, where it has that sort of retro futurism feel, whereas Gattaca does not. I think the film falls short in other ways of just not really deciding which message or something that it wants to hammer home. Right, the genetic determinism and the free will issue, it is there and it gets there, and then but the audience, I don't know if the audience is given anything it can really grab onto. So the very end of the film, this is the spoiler. So the very end of the film, he's supposed to go to space. So here's the twist. The twist is the boss of the bosses is the one who was worried that the flight was going to be canceled. So he's actually behind the murder. Vincent gets right to the end. He has to do one last urine test or something that was unscheduled. And come to find out, the scientist who's really kind of behind regular testing has figured out that he's not who he says he is. It's a left-handed versus right-handed thing. And it's so juvenile. It has to do with how you hold your business while you're peeing. A left-handed person will hold it with his left hand. He's pretending to be a right-handed person. Pick up where I'm coming from. But the scientist has a son who wouldn't live up to the standard. So therefore, because of that and the admiration of Vincent overcoming everything, that's why he lets this all go through. Okay. It just seems like the stakes are also so small. Like, okay, so he would get arrested, right? Okay. He didn't steal anything. He didn't kill anyone. The stakes are so small. It's like disrupting of society. Let's just assume he'd gotten caught. So society wouldn't even have blinked an eye. He would have just been an empty seat on a vessel going in space. So at the end of the day, I don't think that really made much of a difference. So where do I come down with Perez's hate? Probably closer than he thinks. I really don't count this movie as being very rewatchable at all. I feel very similar to how I felt when I saw it. It's like one of these really good concepts, but just not a good film, just not really well executed. And Ethan Hawke, I don't think was Ethan Hawke. I don't think is the problem here. I think he was just not even given a character with much depth. There's just nothing to do. He just kind of just wanders around. He almost feels miscast in this movie. And Jude Law steals everything. Uma feels miscast. She's supposed to be this femme fatale, and she's great in like a Pulp Fiction type of thing, or even Kill Bill, where she's like physical lead actress assassin. She just walks around as sort of like eye candy in this movie. She has very little to offer. So overall, I don't consider this movie very rewatchable at all. I think it's very heavy and dry. It wouldn't be something I could sell Mrs. Pops on. So I'm tending to lean way below the critic score because I know the critics are probably going to have this movie. I think on the surface, I would say this movie is probably like a 3.5 star movie. Most critics probably have it closer to like a 7 or 8 on a 10 scale. I'm more in the Midland. I'm more like a 5. This is a 2.5 star movie for me. I don't find this rewatchable. It's solid. It's got a lot of well-made areas, and like I said, art and production design are probably at the top of that list with Jude Law's performance. But beyond that, yeah, not much for it. So, all right, well, there you go, folks. Let me know what you guys think. Give me other recommendations. Love to hear from you guys. I am Pops.
Thank you for